Welcome to another episode of Russian Hate Speech, where we break down the Kremlin's latest lies against the West. In mid-November 2025, Russian state media attempted to spread propaganda narratives aimed at discrediting the West and justifying the Kremlin's actions. Propagandists continue to show a systematic strategy, portraying Russia as a powerful and morally righteous state, while depicting its opponents as weak, dangerous and dishonest. During the program's 60-minute special edition on the state Russian channel Russia 1 on November 7, 2025, Alexei Zhuravlev, first deputy chairman of the State Duma Committee on Defense, LDPR faction, spread the narrative that Russia's nuclear exercises indicate readiness to use weapons if necessary.
We demonstrated our nuclear exercises on water, on land and in the air. Under the guidance of our Supreme Commander-in-Chief, who by the way was in military uniform. These exercises show that everything works perfectly. What should they conclude? That our entire triad is in full combat readiness, that it's practically impossible to shoot down these delivery systems, some in any case most of them, and thirdly, one of the most important things they must understand, that our leadership has full resolve to use them, if necessary.
This rhetoric illustrates a classic Kremlin tactic to portray Russia as militarily invincible and threatening the West with nuclear weapons. On November 9, 2025, during the program Moscow Kremlin Putin, journalist and co-host Pavel Zarubin used a clip of Vladimir Putin to present the narrative that Western intelligence agencies are allegedly planning information campaigns to destabilize Russia internally.
We must understand this weapon that our adversaries are using against us and improving. I must inform you that we have copies of documents from Western intelligence agencies and foreign centers working for their money, which explicitly state the task of undermining Russia from within, sowing division in our society, provoking conflicts on national and religious grounds.
This segment shows how Russia portrayed the West as the orchestrator of internal chaos, justifying Kremlin control over information and society. On November 10, 2025, during 60-minute special edition, Konstantin Simonov, Director General of the National Energy Security Fund and professor at the Financial University under the government of the Russian Federation, spread the narrative that Russia launched the so-called special military operation to influence global politics.
Therefore, courage is needed here. Courage. Russia has shown courage. Yes, we have certain economic problems because of this, but nevertheless, we expect that our courage will lead to serious changes in global politics in the long term. In fact, otherwise, it would not have been worth starting at all.
This narrative presents Russia as a bold global player whose military actions are justified by the goal of changing the international order. However, even on federal channels, economic problems that the Kremlin has long concealed are briefly mentioned. On November 11, 2025, during evening with Vladimir Solovyov, journalist, politician and former member of the European Parliament from Latvia Andrei Mamikhin spread the narrative that Russia allegedly must cleanse the Russian lands of the Baltics from the virus of Nazism, implying potential military or diplomatic actions.
I want to return again and again to the idea that Russia will have to cleanse the Russian lands of the Baltics from the virus of Nazism. Perhaps this can be done diplomatically rather than military, most likely. And many hope for this. Many hope for the victory of Russia and the Russian weapons, because those playing war games there now. Estonia today in parliament tried to close the border following the example of Lithuania and Belarus. They do not understand at all what today's Russia is, how Russia fights on the fields of the special military operation, what equipment is in the hands of Russian army and Russian soldiers.
This narrative framed the Baltic countries as a legitimate target and Russian aggression against them as a supposedly necessary and even noble anti-Nazi step. This is a classic Kremlin propaganda scheme, justifying potential military escalation under the guise of fighting Nazism. Also on November 11, 2025, during 60 Minutes special edition, Sergei Luzanin, professor at MHIMO and HSE, spread the narrative that European politics is provincial and Russophobic.
One cannot fail to note, in my view, the fairly fair statement of former Finnish President Niinisto that Europe has moved away is moving away from great geopolitics. In fact, despite its normal size today, the European economy leaves behind provincialism and Russophobia. This defines Europe's great geopolitics.
This segment attempts to shape the perception of Europe as weak, divided, and hostile toward Russia, while simultaneously reinforcing the idea of Moscow's advantage in global politics and justifying its actions internally. On November 11, 2025, during an evening with Vladimir Solovyov, historian and international relations expert Andrei Sidorov spread the narrative that Europe and the United States bear the main responsibility for the Ukrainian crisis.
In the Ukrainian crisis, Europe still bears the great responsibility. The United States integrated into this crisis and of course used it. The Obama administration used it to split European countries and Russia and steer them its own way. But specifically the Ukrainian crisis, I will even quote, it was the European Union that became the catalyst of this crisis. It was the EU that raised Maidan. It was the EU that imposed the slogan that Ukraine should be with Europe, not with Russia.
Sidorov's statements aim to create an image of the West as a manipulator responsible for regional instability, completely absolving Russia of responsibility. Russian propaganda simultaneously intimidates its citizens and justifies the war, discrediting the West. It portrays Kremlin aggression as necessary and the whole world as an enemy responsible for problems. Thank you for joining us today. Stay tuned for the next episode of Russian Hate Speech, where we will continue to expose the Kremlin's war on reality.